So, last question, because we have a very tight schedule and we have to resume at 2:30 sharp with Jean-David Lévit, the French Sherpa, who will tell us what happened at the European Council meeting. So it will be from 2:30 till, if I am not, no, 2:45, sorry. So who is 2:40 or 2:45? Huh? 45, so so we can take two more questions, okay. 2:45 till 3:30, if you want to know what really happened at the European Council. So, Jacob.
Thank you very much for this fascinating lecture. I would like, my remark really goes to your long-term perspective and connect with the question about Africa. Demographers tell us that in the next 20 years, the world population will be larger than what it is now by about 1.5 billion people, of which almost all, will be in the emerging countries. But it's not only Asia. In fact, China is about 150 million plus, India about 250 million plus, and Africa about 450 million plus. China is aging. India has a beautiful Gaussian age distribution. And Africa is a question mark. The 450 million will be there if the issues of health and governance and the topics that are discussed this afternoon will be addressed. And if not, it will be a huge tragedy, of course. But if it is addressed, then we are going to have the unique opportunity of the youngest population of the world becoming a huge power. Now, we know very little about it. When we think about Africa, we typically think about it as a place of natural resources and exploitation and the like. So I wonder, I'm optimistic with you about the future, but I wonder about the division between Asia and potentially Africa.
Jakob, let me begin by confessing that I'm not an expert on Africa. So whatever I say about Africa, please take with a pinch of salt. I can tell you, by the way, the first book that I ever published was called Can Asians Think? ? And I remember soon after I published, I got an essay, I got a request from an African in South Africa saying, Mr. Mahbubani, can you write a book called Can Africans Think? I said, no. Only an African can write the book, and only an Asian can write the book about Can Asians Think? So each continent will have its own destiny. And the African continent will have to work out, Jakob, its own destiny. It will have many assets. It will have many challenges. But I think fundamentally that there is absolutely no reason why any African society couldn't perform as well as any Asian society. And if you want proof of that, I can tell you, if you want to understand how much our world has changed, I can tell you that even though some people may either be supporters of President Obama or opponents of President Obama, I can tell you that his election changed world history dramatically because it showed that the son of an African father is good enough to become the President of the United States of America, one of the most difficult jobs in the world. And if the son of an African father can become President of the United States of America, the other sons of Africa can do anything in the world, and that's why I'm optimistic.
So, I saw several hands, but I didn't see who is below the hands. Philippe Moreau-Defarge. And then who else? Okay.
Sir, thank you
Next.
for your expose.
Next.
Your expose was really fascinating.
Parle devant le micro, on entend
Oui,
bien.
but I would like to, your expose was remarkable, but two questions. You didn't mention the ecological question. How are we going to live with over-exploitation of resources? And second question, which is an Asiatic question. What are you going to do with the gap between men and women? You know, in China and India, one of the big issues is the gap between the number of women and the number of men. How are you going to manage that?
I didn't get the second question. What's the second? Sorry, I didn't get your second question. I got your first question on ecology.
My first question, you know, in China today, you have 115 men for 100 women. And in India, you understand my question. What are you going to do with this gender gap?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, by the way, on the ecological thing, I did mention that one of the world's greatest challenges that we face is global warming. And we obviously have to handle the problem of global warming. And our challenge is you're going to have a tremendous explosion of the middle classes who want to have the same kinds of washing machines, refrigerators, cars that you have in the West. And the question is, the world cannot afford to have 3 billion new consumers of that kind. I know that. That's a reality. So we all have to make sacrifices. And here, the big challenge, the reason why, for example, the meeting in Durban is struggling, is that if the world's richest countries, especially up to now, in historical terms, the world's #1 emitter in greenhouse gases, the United States of America, refuses to make a compromise, right, then you cannot expect the poorer countries to lead the way. So we need a new historical bargain on a new grand compact on climate change. But it has to be the richest countries have to demonstrate that they're prepared to show by leadership what is to be done. And unfortunately, unless that happens, you won't get a solution on climate change. And that's a problem. The second one about the demography, you're right. It is the imbalance between the male-female ratio is going to become a huge problem for these countries. And I hope that education will finally teach these Asians who stupidly believe, and I can say this as an Asian, who stupidly believe that a son is more valuable than a daughter. And I think that's wrong. And I think they will wake up to realize that this is a complete prejudice from the past. And with education, I think they'll overcome that prejudice in the years to come.
So I take one last question. So please, do you have the mic? Yes.
Sure.
That's the last question because I want to allow enough time after this big lunch to move slowly from here to the conference room.
Kishore, you've talked of Asian domination, I think in the next 2 or 3 decades that is coming and probably in the century. I would ask you, would you believe that this domination is going to be based only on economic might or also military might, or a combination of the two? And in respect of economic development and might of Asia, I think a very significant point is the ongoing negotiation at Durban. Now, if the growth is going to be stopped or arrested by a non-equitable climate treaty, which bases itself merely on cutting down emissions and not basing it on per capita emissions, how do you see the growth engine of Asia coming up?
Well, by the way, like you, Thierry, I get a sense that the room is now exhausted, so I'll give you two very brief responses. But I'm glad you asked that question. Number one, I want to emphasize that the end of the era of Western domination of world history will not be replaced by an era of Asian domination of world history. There will be no Asian domination. And I want to emphasize that. There's no desire on the part of the Asians to try and go out and conquer, colonize the world in the way that the West did for 200 years. And so hopefully, the leadership that will be provided by the Asian countries will be one of example. And by the way, while there will be military expenditures will continue by Asian countries, the prospect of war in Asia is going down decade by decade. So in East Asia, we don't have zero prospect of war as we have in Europe, but believe me, in the region where you saw the three biggest wars, Korean War, Vietnam War, Sino-Vietnamese War, the guns are silent. And the silence of the guns, I think, will continue in Asia. So there will be no military conflicts in that region. And your second question about the ecological challenges and environmental challenges, they'll be enormous. And I think the biggest mistake that the Asian countries will make is to underestimate these environmental challenges. If you go to Beijing, for example, and you experience the quality of air in Beijing, it's just plain awful. And they've got to do something about that, right? So the Asian countries, if they decide to make environment upfront as a priority in their agenda, that's the smartest thing they can do in the next 10 to 20 years, and I'm reasonably confident that they will do that.
Thank you very much, Kishore, for this outstanding presentation and discussion. Let me remind you that we will resume at 2:45 sharp for the feedback of the European Council meeting until 3:30. Then from 3:30 to 5, there will be the workshop on Europe as a lab for global governance, and then the workshops. So thank you very much, and see you soon.